I'm Ruth Mackenzie, and I'm the artistic director of the Holland Festival, which is based in Amsterdam. And I'm about to go to become artistic director of the Théâtre du Châtelet, which is a very large opera house in the middle of Paris. I'm very, very excited because it's got its own metro station, Châtelet, which is used every day by more Parisians than any other metro station. So my aim is to try and get as many people who know and have heard of the metro station Châtelet to have heard of and visit the opera house that it's named after. But of course, I can only have these jobs because I'm a UK citizen and the UK is currently a member of the European Union. And so, in fact, by the time that Châtelet starts, the first season that I'm programming, I will be illegal, which is a pity. I learnt, as you've already heard this morning, I'm another one that had enough French to be sent to France when I started my life in the arts. And so I learnt about the way that you could join in with consortia, and that if you had a group of friends in different countries in Europe, you could together do remarkable things that you couldn't do on your own. One of our big partners, this is when I was at Nottingham Playhouse, was the Centre of Arts in Bobigny, which is on the edge of Paris. And they used to introduce me to everyone as Ruth Mackenzie. She's big on ideas, but she hasn't got any money. I think that's the story of my life. But what I did learn through those collaborations was that there were some basic rules, and the rules were that the consortia, the collaborations, only worked if you shared the same values. And one of the most important lessons I learnt, and this is, I think, something that we are not always good at in the United Kingdom. Values does not mean money. And in fact, the consortia, the collaborations never worked, never, if the only thing you wanted out of the partnership was money. And I think that's always been something that we were bad at. And of course, that was the sting in the joke from Bobigny. Ruth Mackenzie, big on ideas, but hasn't got any money. So apart from learning how to be part of a consortia, I learnt that just like any other relationship, if all I did was ask for money, I wouldn't have a very good relationship. And I think that that is something that we need to confront, especially at the time when we are especially afraid because we're going to lose money. That's the time when we need to think even more cleverly than we always do, and of course we're always clever, about how to have partnerships, collaborations, relationships, where the value of that relationship is so evident that the money will follow the relationship, the benefits, the outputs. I've just finished a Holland festival where we had 17 world premieres and 34 Dutch premieres, and virtually all of those premieres were co-commissions, co-creations, co-presentations. And it's an entirely natural way to work for the Holland Festival and for all the festivals with whom it partners. And so like the speaker from the British Council, I've had a good opportunity sitting in my festival to listen to colleagues from around Europe talking, marveling about the United Kingdom. And they think that we're mad and sad. And there's a lot of truth in both of that. But they also think that we're self-obsessed. And I think that's another key point for us to reflect on. And maybe it's exactly when, we're at our lowest, and I fear we're not yet actually at our lowest, that we naturally become more introspective and more, for those colleagues in Europe, tedious about the terrible mess that we've got ourselves into. But maybe that's also the time that we have to show that what we have to give. And that's the same point, I guess, as the point about money. We need to show what we have to give. And quite often, we are perceived in Europe as being insular, literally on an island, thinking about ourselves and our own concerns, even before this crisis hit us. So we need to look at the excellent models that we have listened to this morning about those that actually are excelling at reaching out, at giving, at finding new ways to work, at thriving from the innovation, the stimulus that collaboration can give us. In this Holland festival that we've just finished, we had the theme of democracy. We don't have themes. We are artist-led, so we follow artists down the road that they wish to go. I would never, ever say to an artist, would you like to make something about democracy? But what we noticed as we talked to artists about the work they were developing is that a lot of them were concerned about different aspects of democracy, so that a lot of the pieces that we invited began to talk to each other in ways that were extraordinarily interesting, as well as reflect different concerns from different parts of the world to our audience, which comes from the Netherlands, of course, but also internationally. And as a spine down the middle of our festival, we had an extraordinary project by the filmmaker Julian Rosenfeld. It's called Manifesto. Some of you may have seen it. It was originally a co-commission between Melbourne and the Ruhr Triennale, and it's now touring the world. It hasn't yet been to the UK, but when it comes, you must all go. It's a collaboration between Julian Rosenfeld and Kate Blanchett, and they have taken 63 manifestos from 63 different artists and turned them into 13 films, each of them with Kate Blanchett in the centre, and each of them with a sort of cumulative, a mashed up artist manifesto from different artist movements of the 20th century. And what it shows, provokes, is it's an installation. You see 13 films. They all talk to each other at times. It's a work of astonishing beauty. But it provokes you to think about the role of the artist in intervening in politics. And that's really what I want to talk about now, because I think that is perhaps at the heart of one of the things we might want to discuss today, how artists can help us shape the world, change the world. What was interesting for me looking at the work that we'd invited to Amsterdam is, of course, democracy. It's a good word. The best pieces were locally specific. The best pieces were about very particular circumstances, but of course the best pieces were at the same time universal, and the issues that they could raise were of interest way beyond Brazzaville, Congo, or Paris, or Berlin, or the Bronx, Brooklyn. And I think that that's, for me, one of the interesting dilemmas for all of us today, that it's never been so easy a time for artists and audiences to find the universal, to find the global, to find the international. We've heard our audiences are increasingly adept at accessing content from around the world. They've got roots now into content. I mean, of course, firstly and most easily digital, but not only. That meets and reinforces their values, that suits their tastes. And they have that way to roam the world. Increasingly, they're very adept at finding without us. So on the one hand, access to culture, and I'm using culture in the broadest sense, and I am interchanging between art and artists and culture just for the sake of simplicity of lists of genres, so forgive me. But access to culture has never been easier, especially for digital first generation, digital born, digital natives. But similarly, there's never been a greater need, I think, for the local voices, the local relationships, for the locally specific voices to be heard and understood. We had in the Holland Festival, and this is my last example from the Holland Festival, forgive me, we had an artist called Boris Sharmats, who had just made a new work where he and his dancers explored not just the victims of the Charlie Hebdo attack. You remember that terrible attack in Paris where journalists and cartoonists were murdered by terrorists, but he also, with great bravery, explored the point of view of the terrorists. And we invited him to perform at 11 o'clock at night, it had to be when it got dark, in a place called Belmar, which is perhaps the most deprived district of Amsterdam, with an incredibly diverse community with a lot of poverty and a lot of anger, actually. And alongside the project with Boris, we also had the Flexin dancers from Brooklyn who have mixed a form of street dance from Jamaica with urban street dance from Brooklyn and created a new form, Flexin, that they see as being as important an evolution as an art form as ballet was in the 19th century. So they're now codifying it in the same sort of way as ballet. It has a lot of similarities, I think, with ballet. They struggle to have a voice. They struggle to be taken seriously as an art form, as serious artists. We got quite a lot of criticism for having them in the festival because they're just street artists. And they were a very obvious group to go into partnership in Belmar. Boris Sharmats maybe was not, but as I stood outdoors at 11 o'clock at night, he combines a lot of monologues with the dance. The final monologues were from the terrorists. And they started, I am the person you won't see on the surveillance camera. I am the person whose eyes you'll never see. They were very beautifully brave pieces, trying to explore through the words and the dance the way a terrorist might think. And it made me think, which is always good, and it made me think about inclusion and about perhaps some of the values that we take for granted that maybe we have to think about again as we look over the cliff's edge. So I remembered Emily Thornberry. I don't know how many other people will remember this. She did, when she, a million years ago, in the days when the Labour Party was run by Ed Miliband, she put up on Twitter a rather thoughtless and insensitive picture of a man from Essex with a white van. It was during a by-election, and made an inappropriate comment for which he was fired from the shadow cabinet. But then I wondered, in the implicit attitude that she had expressed, I wondered how much better I was in my practice. If I thought about the choices that I make to be inclusive in this festival, as well as the projects I've mentioned, sorry, I lied. We've had artists, the Nile Project, who came from every African country that works along the Nile. We had a refugee from Brazzaville, Congo, who made a 3.5-hour piece about being a refugee. We made a lot of choices about the sort of voices we wanted to share with our public and to give a platform to. Last year, we worked with partners here in London to reunite the orchestra of Arab instruments that had been a great force in Damascus, but of course since the war had been scattered to the winds. And I tell you, if you want a challenge, trying to get visas for the orchestra of Arab instruments, half of whom were Syrian refugees scattered around the world, but 15 of whom were still in Damascus. That's a project that can kill you before you succeed. But we did succeed. But my point is not that we succeeded. My point is that the choices we made, of course, demonstrated our values and the values of our partners. But to whom did they close the doors? For me as a curator and for us as a festival. When I think about how throughout my life I have tried to work with those who I felt needed support, needed partnership, and whose cultures I was fascinated in. I've never worked with the guy who has a white van and lives in Essex. And I think that I'm not alone in saying that. And I think that we have to think about that. We the British cultural leaders, because we are here to change the world, and yet we have somehow managed to ignore a great section of the community who then, through that referendum last year, turned against us. And what's scary is they did turn against us. It wasn't just the politicians that they turned against. It was us too. So, as I stood on that dark public square where the police car was circling around, which I thought was rather great, and it was free, so we had a lot of local people coming and going, watching this performance, trying to understand potential terrorists. I thought about who the people were in the communities in the Netherlands, those that voted for Geert Wilders, and why did they vote for him, who the people are in Paris and in France, in the place where I'm going to work, who had turned often from socialism to Marine Le Pen, from socialism and from the right wing as well, of course. And I thought, well, okay, I've got to be more serious about this, because I don't think enough about that, and I don't reach out to find the artists and to talk to the community, to build those partnerships, to create the work that could help me understand, help them understand, where all of us could grow together. It's something that we all tirelessly do, but we all make these choices as to which communities, which cultures, which forms of art, which sorts of innovation we want to invest in. And maybe we have got to think a little harder about how we can give to those people, because actually, honestly, I think we rejected them. So that's my provocative bit. One of the, I think, interesting other aspects of democracy, the theme, was that I realized it wasn't really just about content. I mean, we had lots of pieces. We had Romeo Castellucci doing Democracy in America, based on Alexis de Tocqueville's masterpiece, Democracy in America. But more interestingly for me, we had artists who tried to explore how you break down the traditional barriers where content, a film is there on the screen. You sit in rows, you watch the film, you eat some sweets, popcorn, have a drink, that's it. And those that were trying to empower their audience members to become participants or even to become creators. This is work that, again, all of you have done, I know. But maybe it's work where there's another step to go. Not just in the analog world, but of course also in the digital world. Some of you, forgive me, have heard me say this before, but when we live in a world, as we now do, where the average person with a smartphone looks at this 300 times a day, the relationship you have to the content is entirely different from when you sit in a row and stare at a film. You feel that you own, even if you're only accessing this content, you feel that you can interact with it, that you have power over it. And maybe we as curators and artists haven't yet caught up with that, and caught up with the way that we can take advantage of our audience becoming participants, having power. It's an easy word to empower, but actually to give away power is not an easy thing for us to do. And every one of us in this room, we have power, which of course we fought for, we've won. So we don't like really to give it away. But maybe we have to. We have to learn to listen harder, to create partnerships outside our comfort zone, outside the bubble, to begin to bring in those in the community that we haven't much bothered about, not just those in the community that we most want to invite into our world. And the reason we need to do that is because we can't afford to have fatigue about democracy at this stage. Today, there's a letter by cities, an open letter to government, calling for the power of cities to be recognised, the power of cities to be inclusive, to serve all their communities and the needs they have to work with other cities in Europe and around the world. And of course, today's also, this is boring, but I think it's pretty important, it's the start of the journey of the European Union withdrawal bill through the House of Commons. And I'm going to let you Google that and find out about it. But we talked earlier this morning about the deficit of ethical leadership. And it was inspiring to hear our colleague from Julie's Bicycle talk about how the response to that is to start doing training, is to start training ourselves to be better leaders. And I think it's not just about climate change. I think it's about the way that we create, consume, distribute, share, develop our cultural work and our relations with our community. Because I think we are in a sort of last chance saloon about understanding and analysing the limits of inclusion and how to get ourselves out of the mess that we, not alone, but we were part of getting into. Inclusion is a great word, and it sounds like an easy word, but in fact, implicit in inclusion is exclusion. And for those that we include, we're sending out signals to those that we have not included, that they are not welcome. And maybe we have not paid sufficient attention to that, and we need to pay more attention. We don't want to abandon any of those that we have included or any of those cultures that we have welcomed and worked on. But what are we going to do about those that we have never said, come with your white van, come, let's work together and talk. We're meant to be brilliant at the zeitgeist. That's what we're meant to be good at. And it seems to me that actually in the last few years, we've not been so good, because a lot of us have been caught really by surprise. And not least me. For 2 years, I've been doing these brilliant themes, which are politically based in Amsterdam. And each year, I've been caught by surprise by the announcement of an election in the United Kingdom, which completely derails my theme. But seriously, now is the time for us to become good again at spotting what the communities that we serve need from us and how we can help contribute to doing what we're meant to be brilliant at, which is providing the glue to create community cohesion. Because if we don't do it now, then we do just jump off the cliff. Thank you.